Hey guys, so this is the second option for the form lesson. I'm going to show you how to make a salt dough out of flour, salt, and water. So I'm going to take you through the process. You're first going to mix the dough, and then you're going to create your objects. Then you have to bake them, and then you can paint them. I bake these at 250 degrees for about an hour and a half, so they do take some time. And that time range might change depending on how thick or thin your projects are. If they're thinner, they're going to take less time. If they're much thicker, they're going to take more time. So also, in the video, it shows me using wax paper. The wax paper ended up sticking to the bottom a little, so I would either suggest using parchment paper or foil when you're doing this. So here's some of my examples. I did paw prints of my dogs. Those turned out pretty well. I painted over with acrylic paint, and it seems to be sticking really well to the dough or the clay. But what I noticed too is watercolor works also very well. I did this when I made kind of impressions in the clay with fake flowers, and then I just watercolored over them. These two are also acrylic paints. So I understand that not all of you have paints at home. If you just want to do the clay project and not add color to it, that's also acceptable too. These were cookie cutters, and this one was like a gingerbread cookie cutter that I added more details to, and this was a sugar skull cookie cutter. You'll notice that most of my projects are fairly flat, and that's because the dough isn't like the clay that we use at school. It does not have a lot of like rigidity to it or stiffness, so you have to keep your projects pretty flat. So I'm excited to see what you create, but just realize this is a messy project. So if you don't want the mess, you can go ahead and do the paper mask project. So let's get started. The clay we're going to make requires very simple ingredients. We're just going to use flour, salt, and water. Now, when I was looking for a recipe for clay, there are so many out there. There's a lot of clay recipes that call for baking soda and cornstarch. I chose this recipe because I felt like most of you would have the supplies at home. And what we're actually making is something called a salt dough. So what you're going to do is you're going to take 2 cups of flour. So I'm going to get that ready right now. So here's 1, 2 cups. Then I'm going to get 1 cup of salt. Takes a lot of salt. Trying to get enough salt. All right, 1 cup of salt, and then 1 cup of cold water. Then what you can do is you can mix it in. So I am just going to start mixing it in with my hands. So I have mixed my clay up, and it's looking pretty good. The recipe called for 2 cups of flour, 1 cup of salt, and 1 cup of water, but I noticed as I was mixing it, and you can see in the video, it was super liquidy. So I had to, I think, almost add up to another cup of flour to get it to this consistency. But we got some clay going on. Now, this is not the same clay that we use in the classroom, so it has some limitations for building. When I was starting to work with it, you can notice that I can form it into a circle, but as it kind of sits, it will lose its shape a little. So it's better to think a little bit more flat when we're making our creations. So I'm going to show you a couple examples of ways that I'm going to use the clay, but remember, it is totally up to you what you want to make with this creation. Okay, so I wanted to show you a couple techniques you can use for this clay. Remember, this clay is not like the clay we use in school. It's actually very soft and stretchy, so we have to do a couple things to make sure that, like, after we've made our objects, that they don't stretch out. So first thing that I did is I took little paw prints of my two dogs. I made sure to have wax paper underneath because that prevents it from sticking, and it also helps with moving the clay afterwards. So I wanted to first show you how to use the cookie cutters with it. So I'm going to start by taking a chunk of clay. Now, if you don't have a rolling pin, that's okay. You can probably flatten it pretty easily. I'm just going to roll it out a little bit. Once the clay gets too thin, it just stretches so easily. So that's honestly all I have to do. Now I'm just going to place this on the wax paper, kind of just set up for the cookie cutter. Then I'm going to take the cookie cutter, press it in, wiggle it a little. I'm going to lift up. Remember, it's super soft. So then I'm going to pull the excess clay away from the cookie cutter. And there is my little figure. Now, I'm going to add some details to it to make it look more like a person. Okay, so I finished with the details. So I made a little self-portrait. This is like a little paint palette and a little paintbrush. But when I'm working with this, as I'm doing it, I just have to be so careful because the dough is so soft. It's kind of like just kind of slowly spreading out. So just be careful and don't get frustrated with the clay because whatever you make, it's gonna look awesome. So I'm gonna set this aside, but notice it's so easy for me to move because I already have it on the wax paper, and that's gonna be key to like moving your artwork without warping it. So I'm gonna put that away. I'm gonna show you what I'm gonna do with another cookie cutter. So I actually have a sugar skull cookie cutter. And what I'm gonna do, so I'm gonna place out my clay. I'm gonna roll it out just slightly, big enough so the mold will fit over it. I'm gonna flip it over. Okay. It's crazy how stretchy this clay is. So then I'm gonna press it down and I'm gonna wiggle it. And then I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna remove the excess stuff around it. And what I really like about this cookie cutter is the designs are pushed out on the top. So what you do is you flip it over and press it down and wiggle it. And then, let's see if I can peel this off without warping it. I slowly peel it off. Okay, not too bad. Okay, and then I'm done with that one. So I'm gonna set that aside. I have a little bit extra clay left, and let's say you don't have cookie cutters, you don't wanna make a bowl, you can just take your clay and form it into like a blob shape, and then you can press into it, almost like we're making a fossil. So I have some dried leaves and flowers, but if you want, you can do this with actual like flowers or leaves outside. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna gently arrange them. I don't know how well this leaf is going to show up because it's pretty thin. So maybe like this. This comes around here. Okay. So then you can press it down with your hands, or like I'm just gonna gently roll over with the rolling pin. And you see it kind of embeds it, and then I lift up. And I have all different textures, like the leaf didn't turn out that great. But when I add paint, it's going to look a lot better. Okay, so there's my impressions. You know what, I am not digging the leaf right there, so let's put another flower here instead to cover that up. And we'll see how that turns out. It'll be an experiment. Okay, so Again, I have the wax paper underneath it so I can move it easily so it can dry just for a little bit. And if you want to, I didn't have any toothpicks, but I have these little skewers. If you wanted to add designs into it too, that might be pretty cool. So I showed you a whole bunch of different ways to use the clay. Just remember, it is not the same clay as the classroom. It might get a little frustrating because it's very soft and it tends just to kind of like, as you build the stuff, slump. So it's very important to make sure your projects are kind of flat. This is a bit messier than the normal projects we've been doing. So if you don't want all the mess, you can do the mass project too. Remember, I'm giving you 2 options for these projects. Okay, so my clay pieces are out of the oven. I cooked them at 250 degrees for about an hour and a half. That time can change based on how thick your clay is. So while they are pretty hard, they do feel a little bit soft when you press down into them, but they're gonna hold their shape. So it is up to you. If you don't have any paint, you could try coloring with crayon if you wanted to. You can be done now. I have some acrylic paint, so I'm just going to paint it. I also have watercolor, and I'm going to see how the watercolor looks too. So remember, the clay project is optional. If you don't want to get messy with the clay, you can do the paper mass project, which also is in this lesson. So I'm looking forward to seeing what you create.